Hi, I'm Sarah Weiler from Contemporary Education, and today I'm going to be talking to you about shifting school culture in mainstream education from a culture that's based on fragmentation to a culture that's based on connection. This video is part of a larger video series that I'm talking about the 5 C's of contemporary education, which are new basic principles that I propose for education that shift away from a set of old basic principles. One of those old principles is reproduction, that I propose shifting to creativity. Another one is tolerance, that I propose shifting to caring. Another is obedience, that I propose shifting to critique. And yet another is competition, that should shift towards collaboration. And today's video will talk about shifting from fragmentation to a culture based on connection. So what do I mean by fragmentation? What I mean is we fragment the curriculum into subjects and those subjects into different units, and we separate them from one another. So the subjects are taught sometimes with separate teachers, sometimes in separate spaces, sometimes different times of the day. And all of these disciplines or subjects are also separated or fragmented from real life situations and the problems that they bring and the real world that we live in. So we're often taught these concepts that come from the curriculum from each discipline, but they're disconnected and fragmented from life, from the life that students lead beyond the walls of the school. So we need to redesign how we're working with schooling and redesign it from this fragmentation to connection, connecting disciplines to one another, working with interdisciplinary projects, and always working with different concepts that the students are learning in relation to the lives that they lead, in relation to real world problems, real world situations. Why do we need that? Because when we look at the world as just a bunch of distinct parts, we cannot see how they all fit together as a whole. And we cannot help the students to learn in a meaningful way, that they can take the knowledge that they're learning and use it in their lives to make decisions that are more informed, that are more intentional. If you've watched my other videos in this series, you'll see there's a connection back to this reproductive model of teaching and learning in relation to knowledge and a creative model of teaching and learning in relation to knowledge. Students need to use knowledge as a tool, not as an end in itself. It's a means for something, and that something is real-world problem solving, thinking of innovative solutions, thinking of redesigns of the designs that already exist. So it should be something that empowers. So by making these connections between disciplines and these disciplines with the real world, that's a way that we can make schools more meaningful places to the societies that we live in, and more meaningful to the students, that they can see the role that what they learn inside of the classroom, how it impacts the lives that they lead outside of the classroom. So there's always this connection between what's happening inside the walls of the school to what's happening beyond the walls of the school, and they're in constant dialogue. So students can bring questions from outside of school into school, and they can look at them through the lens of the concepts that they're learning. I'm not proposing that we should do away with curriculum, do away with subjects. I think that it's a helpful way to pedagogically organize teaching and learning. However, they cannot be fragmented and disconnected from one another, and they cannot be closed off from the world happening outside of the school. What's happening outside of the school needs to come into the school, because that's where students are empowered to deal with it in a better way. As I said, a more informed and intentional and a meaningful way, that the knowledge empowers them, equips them, it gives them a tool chest, a repertoire to be able to use to make meaningful decisions. Now, when talking about fragmentation, it goes even deeper than just making adjustments to the curriculum and creating possibilities for interdisciplinary work and connecting that to real life situations and real world problem solving. There's a deeper philosophical issue at hand. If we look at the metaphor for schooling, oftentimes people talk about schooling as a factory system or a machine, or taking like a hard drive metaphor, that students' brains are hard drives and teachers are the programmers, or the school curriculum programs them in a certain way. And this mentality, a mechanistic mentality, it breaks down things into parts. It separates everything. And when we study one part, we isolate it from the whole or the totality that it is part of. Because all parts are parts within something larger, within a system. And what's missing here in this kind of metaphor is studying the relationships that exist amongst the parts, how things connect. So moving from fragmentation, isolation, separation to something whole, a holistic approach, looking at the totality, looking at something in its full integrity, what makes it integral, the multiple parts and how they relate to one another, how they are interdependent and interconnected, and that's really where we get to know something, is through the relationships, not only by studying the part in isolation from its relations to other parts within something larger, within a network or a system or a web of some sort of relations. So to make schooling more meaningful, learning more meaningful, it's important that we focus on the relationships and the systematic nature of how things work in the world. It doesn't mean that we don't also take things apart and see how the different parts are working, but never as if they in and of themselves function in isolation and function in this separate and fragmented way. So I think we need to shift this metaphor of thinking of schools in this kind of factory or machine or mechanistic metaphor to an ecological metaphor, an ecosystem metaphor for education and for teaching and learning, that the learning is in how things connect, not how they are separated out. So that's kind of putting this in a larger context, philosophical context, to understand the urgent need, not only in changing practically from a fragmentation school culture to a connected or a school culture based on connection, but that we also need to change our beliefs about how the world works theoretically and philosophically, from this mechanistic metaphor to an ecological or an ecosystem metaphor. That's my take on it, moving from fragmentation to connection as one of the 5 C's of contemporary education. And I'd like to know what you think. Join me and others in this dialogue about contemporary education. Do you agree, disagree, partially disagree? What are your reasons? Join me and others at contemporaryeducation.com. Thank you.